From the very first day of her marriage, Elena's life had taken a turn she had never expected. Stepping into her husband's well-off family's home, she was met not with warm smiles or gentle welcomes but with cold, scrutinizing eyes that seemed to measure her every movement. Her mother-in-law, Kamla Devi, silently evaluating whether Elena was fit to carry the endless responsibilities of cooking, cleaning, and managing the household, while her sister-in-law, Neha, hovered nearby with a sharp, judgmental gaze, making Elena feel as though she had entered a world where she was invisible, useful only as a servant. And during the first family dinner, Kamla Devi casually announced to the entire table, "From here, you'll handle the cooking, cleaning, and managing everything." And Elena nodded politely, hiding the storm of emotions within, a faint spark igniting inside her that whispered, "One day, everything will change." And that very night, after the house had gone quiet and everyone had gone to bed, Elena carefully pulled out her notebooks, filled with sketches, swatches, and design concepts she had cherished since childhood, meticulously documenting every idea from furniture placement to lighting schemes to wall textures, imagining how she could transform even the most ordinary spaces into vibrant, welcoming homes. And every pencil stroke became a silent rebellion against the dismissive attitudes of her new family, who constantly reminded her that her talents were just hobbies, saying things like, "You'll never run a real business with those silly designs." Yet Elena knew her vision was her secret power, quietly growing as she handled the day-to-day chores of the household, cooking, cleaning, organizing guests, making sure every detail was perfect under the scrutinizing eyes of her mother-in-law and sister-in-law, while her husband, Arjun, remained mostly neutral, observing without intervening, leaving Elena to navigate a delicate balance of obedience, invisibility, and unacknowledged effort. But with every sarcastic comment and belittling remark, Elena's determination only strengthened, forming a quiet resolve that one day she would reveal her true value in a way that no one could ignore. And she began to think strategically, turning her passion into a plan, secretly imagining how she could launch her own interior design business, quietly building a professional portfolio while maintaining the facade of the dutiful daughter-in-law. And, little by little, as days turned into weeks, Elena found moments amidst the chores to refine her skills, study modern trends, practice new techniques, and envision herself not as a subordinate in her husband's household, but as a creator, an artist, a professional. And gradually, secretly, she began taking small steps to make that vision real, starting with her own home and then helping friends, tweaking layouts, adjusting lighting, arranging furniture, and each successful execution gave her a sense of achievement that no compliment from her in-laws could provide. And as she managed this dual life, one of visible domestic submission and one of hidden professional ambition, she realized that patience, persistence, and secrecy were her greatest allies. And in this slow, deliberate growth, Elena found a thrill, a sense of purpose and quiet joy in knowing that one day her efforts would come to light, revealing not just her talent but also the strength, intelligence, and resilience that had been ignored and underestimated for so long. And as she folded her sketches and turned off the desk lamp that first night, a calm determination settled over her, a promise to herself that she would never be overlooked, that she would build her own empire right under the noses of those who refused to see her worth. And with that thought, she drifted to sleep, a faint smile touching her lips, leaving the audience with a clear sense of suspense, anticipation, and curiosity, knowing that Elena's journey had only just begun, that every silent act, every hidden sketch, every unacknowledged chore was a step toward the grand revelation that was yet to come, establishing the foundation for a story of silent struggle, hidden brilliance, and ultimate vindication that would leave viewers hooked and eagerly awaiting what Elena would do next. And thus, part one of her story, setting the stage for her challenges, patience, and secret planning, concludes with a subtle spark of promise, while the viral mini-title for this part reads, "The Daughter-in-Law They Ignored, But She Was Planning Her Empire." After the first few months of adjusting to her new life in her husband's luxurious home, Elena realized that surviving her mother-in-law's constant criticism and her sister-in-law's dismissive glares was only half the battle. The other half was building something that belonged entirely to her, something that could not be ignored, dismissed, or belittled, and so every night, after completing the endless household chores, ensuring that every corner of the house gleamed under the strict standards of Kamla Devi, after cooking, cleaning, and managing every detail of the household, Elena would retreat to her small, quiet room, where she had created a sanctuary of inspiration and creativity, a space filled with sketches, swatches, design samples, and notebooks packed with her ideas and concepts. And it was here, under the soft glow of a desk lamp, that Elena began to transform her passion for interior design into a real, tangible business plan, meticulously documenting every concept, arranging every sample, and experimenting with color palettes, lighting combinations, furniture arrangements, and textures, testing and adjusting until every design reflected not just beauty but functionality, efficiency, and the subtle expression of her own personality, which had been suppressed by the constant undervaluation from her in-laws. And she also began researching trends, studying high-end design magazines, analyzing popular interior designers' work, and attending online workshops at night, all while maintaining the public facade of the obedient, hard-working daughter-in-law who did nothing but serve her family, silently honing skills that would one day allow her to stand on her own, independently and confidently, a professional in a field that the very people who mocked her had no idea she could master. And as weeks turned into months, Elena secured her first small project through a friend of a friend, a modest living room that needed a complete makeover, and though it was small, she poured herself into every detail, selecting the perfect furniture, arranging lighting to highlight textures, choosing colors that elevated the mood of the space, and after the completion, the client was so impressed that she provided a glowing testimonial and recommended Elena to several acquaintances. And even though no one in Elena's household knew of the secret success, this small victory ignited a fire within her, a confirmation that her talent was real, powerful, and unstoppable. And encouraged by the first successful project, Elena quietly took on more work, gradually building a portfolio while balancing her domestic responsibilities, and soon, word-of-mouth referrals began to bring her higher-profile clients, each project more challenging than the last, forcing her to push her creativity, problem-solving, and time management to new heights. And Elena, always methodical, began assembling a small, trusted team of assistants and a junior designer, teaching them to understand her vision, her style, and the meticulous attention to detail that defined her work, all while keeping her professional identity hidden from the family, who continued to belittle her in passing, saying things like, "All you do is cook and clean. Your designs are nothing more than a hobby." And Elena would smile politely, concealing the immense satisfaction she felt as she received payments, glowing testimonials, and invitations for new projects, and she carefully organized her schedule so that mornings were devoted to household duties, afternoons to client meetings and site surveys, and late nights to refining her designs, reviewing sketches, sourcing materials, and planning future projects, always ensuring that the quality of her domestic work remained impeccable so as not to raise suspicion. And through this careful balancing act, Elena developed an inner strength and discipline that allowed her to grow her secret empire, while continuing to exist in the shadow of her family's ignorance. And as she completed each project, she documented every step, photographing spaces before and after, creating digital presentations, and maintaining meticulous records for her growing portfolio. And in doing so, she built a solid foundation for her business that could one day rival the most prominent designers in the city, all while keeping her identity a secret, maintaining the illusion of a woman whose value was measured solely by how well she could serve her in-laws. And each small victory, each satisfied client, and each glowing testimonial added to her quiet confidence, the knowledge that one day she would reveal her accomplishments in a way that would leave no doubt about her skill, intelligence, and creativity. And during this period, Elena also developed strategies to protect her work, ensuring contracts, client communication, and financial records were kept entirely separate from her personal life, and she trained her assistants, meticulously so, that the quality of work reflected her vision perfectly. And gradually, as her business grew, she began to receive invitations for larger, more prestigious projects, each opportunity testing her creativity, strategic planning, and patience, and reinforcing the quiet determination that had become the core of her personality. And while her family continued to underestimate her at every turn, dismissing her talents as mere hobbies or insignificant interests, Elena found herself empowered by the contrast between their ignorance and her growing success, and she continued to build her business methodically, night after night, always keeping her eye on the bigger picture, until she finally reached a point where her firm was ready for high-profile projects that would bring her name into prominence, and viewers could feel the suspense and tension, knowing that the quiet, underestimated daughter-in-law was secretly building an empire under their very noses, and that every small, unacknowledged act of diligence was a step toward a grand reveal. Months of careful planning, sleepless nights, and secret projects had finally positioned Elena at a turning point where her skills and persistence would be tested on a much larger stage. For one day she received a call from a highly influential client, a prestigious socialite family in the city known for their lavish lifestyle, impeccable taste, and uncompromising standards, who were looking for a designer to completely transform their penthouse apartment in preparation for an extravagant gala they were hosting. And when Elena heard about the scope of the project, she felt a mixture of excitement and nervous energy surge through her, because this was not just another small living room or a friend's house. It was a high-profile, high-stakes project that could launch her reputation into the next level of the industry. But she also knew that balancing this alongside her domestic duties in her husband's home would require absolute precision, stealth, and discipline. For her mother-in-law, Kamla Devi, and sister-in-law Neha continued their relentless scrutiny, constantly undermining her, belittling every attempt she made at creative expression in the home, saying things like, "Designs are fine for fun, but don't expect to earn anything serious," while Elena, as always, smiled politely, masking the intense determination and carefully orchestrated plan building inside her, because she knew that showing even a hint of frustration or impatience could alert them to her ambitions and distract her from the ultimate goal of finally proving her worth. And so she meticulously scheduled her days, mornings dedicated to household responsibilities, ensuring that the house ran flawlessly under the critical eyes of her family, afternoons to client correspondence, site surveys, and project execution, and late nights to strategy, design refinement, and material research, which allowed her to push the boundaries of her creativity, experiment with bolder styles, and perfect the presentation she would ultimately deliver. And the first visit to the penthouse was a defining moment. Elena observed the space carefully, noting the angles of natural light, the flow of traffic through rooms, the positioning of structural features, and began mentally layering textures, colors, furniture, and lighting to create an ambience that would be both luxurious and uniquely tailored to the family's lifestyle and personality. And as she presented her vision to the clients, every board, every sketch, every mood board was strategically crafted to impress, showcasing not just her aesthetic sense, but also her professionalism, attention to detail, and understanding of the client's needs, which they immediately recognized, praising her innovative approach, her ability to optimize space without sacrificing elegance, and her flawless coordination plan for materials and installation. And Elena, despite her excitement, maintained composure, making subtle notes about adjustments requested by the client, already envisioning how her team would execute the plan flawlessly. And while this was happening, her in-laws remained blissfully unaware that the woman they dismissed daily as a simple homemaker was orchestrating a project of such magnitude, silently managing a team, coordinating suppliers, ensuring that every detail from the texture of the walls to the placement of each decorative item aligned perfectly with the client's expectations. And over the next several weeks, Elena's work on the project was relentless. She personally reviewed every shipment, every furniture piece, every paint sample, adjusting where needed to maintain perfection, working late into the night while also keeping her household duties flawless. And each day, as she walked through the penthouse and observed the transformation, she felt a quiet pride, knowing that soon the reveal would not only astonish her clients, but also indirectly send a message to those who had underestimated her, that she was capable of extraordinary achievements beyond their recognition. And finally, the day of the grand reveal arrived, with Elena's team having worked tirelessly to complete the installation, lighting, furniture placement, and finishing touches in perfect alignment with her vision. And as the clients prepared for the gala, Elena orchestrated the final walkthrough, leading them from room to room with subtle gestures, explaining her design choices, highlighting the use of natural light, the flow and functionality of the space, the harmonious balance of colors, textures, and materials, and the clients were utterly captivated, their admiration evident in every smile, gasp, and comment, and Elena watched discreetly, feeling the thrill of validation and the intoxicating satisfaction of silent success, all while her own household continued to treat her with indifference, unaware that the woman who had cooked, cleaned, and managed their home flawlessly day after day was now designing luxurious spaces for the city's elite, proving that her abilities were real, powerful, and undeniable. And in that moment, Elena silently promised herself that her next steps would not only continue to expand her business but also, eventually, confront the very family who had never acknowledged her value. And as she documented the final photographs of the completed penthouse, created detailed reports, and prepared presentations for her clients, she felt a sense of calm triumph, knowing that the foundation of her empire was now visible to the world, even if still hidden from her in-laws. And for the audience, the suspense and engagement reached a peak because Elena's hidden talent, persistence, and discipline were finally manifesting in results that could no longer be ignored, setting the stage for future confrontations, family realizations, and the ultimate vindication that viewers had been anticipating. Months of carefully building her reputation and completing high-profile projects had prepared Elena for a moment she had been quietly anticipating, the opportunity to secretly design for her own family, the very people who had never acknowledged her talents, who had constantly belittled her, dismissing her skills as nothing more than a hobby, who had consistently attributed her husband's successes to their upbringing, rather than acknowledging her quiet support. And one day, a surprising twist of fate arrived when her mother-in-law, Kamla Devi, and sister-in-law, Neha, decided to hire a well-known interior designer to renovate the family's showpiece home in preparation for a grand wedding function that was to take place in a few months, a decision that Elena instantly recognized as her chance to demonstrate her professional mastery while keeping her identity secret until the perfect moment. And without letting her in-laws know, Elena arranged for her own firm to handle the project under the name of her company, sending her team ahead to survey the house, take measurements, plan logistics, and procure materials, while she carefully timed her arrival so that she could personally supervise the final installations and touches in a way that would ensure the most dramatic and impressive reveal, all the while maintaining the guise of someone who was merely assisting as a colleague or consultant from the hired firm. And during these weeks, she meticulously coordinated every detail, selecting furniture, coordinating color schemes, choosing fabrics and textures that match the home's architecture, designing lighting to highlight focal points, and creating custom pieces to enhance the elegance of every room. And she communicated with her team constantly, approving layouts, material choices, and design tweaks, while simultaneously continuing her household responsibilities as the seemingly unimportant daughter-in-law, cooking, cleaning, managing schedules, and keeping her demeanor neutral in front of her family, never allowing a hint of her inner triumph to show. And each day, as Elena walked through the project's progress, she felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that she was executing the most important and personally meaningful project of her life, that the very people who had underestimated her would soon experience the results of her talent without any idea that she was behind it. And the suspense for the audience built steadily, knowing that Elena's invisible work was about to culminate in a moment of dramatic revelation, a turning point where all her patience, strategy, and hidden skill would finally be noticed by those who had never given her credit. And as her team completed installations room by room, Elena arrived for the final phase, timing her entrance carefully so that she would be the one to guide her family through the finished spaces, observing their reactions and silently savoring the anticipation. And when she stepped in, the room fell quiet, every glance and gesture reflecting a mix of curiosity and expectation, while she maintained an outward calm and professional composure, presenting each area as a designer from the firm would, yet knowing deep down that the family shock would be even greater when they realized who had orchestrated everything. And as she walked through the grand living room, the dining area, and the master suite, pointing out details and carefully explaining design choices, the audience could sense the tension rising, because every subtle nod, every impressed murmur, every unintentional compliment directed at her work built toward the eventual climax. And while her mother-in-law and sister-in-law were preoccupied with the beauty and sophistication of the spaces, unaware that Elena was the mastermind behind it all, Elena's mind raced with the perfect plan for the moment of revelation, knowing that her years of silence, persistence, and unrecognized effort were about to pay off in a way that would leave her family stunned, forced to confront the fact that the very person they had dismissed, ignored, and undermined for years was not only capable but exceptional. And all the while, Elena's husband, Arjun, watched with a mix of pride and surprise, beginning to understand the scope of her achievements, the depth of her talent, and the silent dedication that had gone unnoticed for so long. And for the viewers, the suspense, anticipation, and satisfaction were perfectly aligned. Because every carefully orchestrated step, every subtle reaction, every moment of dramatic tension reinforced the slow burn narrative of the underestimated daughter-in-law who had quietly built her own empire and was now orchestrating a scenario that would finally demand recognition. And the project continued, room by room, detail by detail, each completed space showcasing Elena's ability to combine creativity, elegance, and functionality in a seamless way that left her family in awe. And as the final room was revealed, Elena allowed herself the smallest, satisfied smile, knowing that the culmination of her secret efforts would soon be acknowledged, that the stage was set for her ultimate vindication, and that the audience had witnessed not just her professional genius, but also the meticulous patience, strategic planning, and emotional resilience that had allowed her to achieve it while remaining invisible to those who had underestimated her. As the weeks passed and Elena's secret project in her family's showpiece home neared completion, subtle signs began to emerge that her talent could no longer remain unnoticed, though her in-laws were still unaware of the mastermind behind the incredible transformation. And it was in these small moments that Elena's silent victory slowly started to take shape. Her mother-in-law, Kamla Devi, while inspecting a perfectly arranged living room, paused and tilted her head, murmuring in a tone that was almost disbelief. The furniture, the lighting, everything feels so coordinated, it's unlike anything we've ever had. And even Neha, who had spent months rolling her eyes at Elena's so-called hobby, found herself quietly observing the clean lines, the perfect color gradients on the walls, and the way the textures of fabrics, rugs, and drapes complemented the natural light streaming into the rooms, without realizing that Elena herself was walking just a few steps behind them, giving only subtle guidance to her team, carefully watching their reactions, their admiration, their silent approval, and it filled her with an intense, quiet satisfaction, because every unnoticed hour she had spent sketching, designing, researching, and coordinating was now manifesting in a way that demanded attention. And Elena maintained her calm exterior, presenting herself as a consultant from her firm, smiling politely, giving professional explanations, while internally she reveled in the tension she was building, knowing that each impressed glance, each lingering observation, was a step closer to the moment when the truth of her authorship would be revealed. And throughout the house, her team executed every detail with precision, installing furniture exactly as Elena envisioned, arranging decorative elements, art, and lighting so that every corner of the home reflected sophistication, balance, and elegance, all while Elena balanced the silent thrill of accomplishment with the careful management of her family's expectations, knowing that a single slip could reveal her identity too soon and ruin the emotional payoff she had been waiting for years to achieve. And as the family moved from room to room, each more spectacular than the last, they began to comment openly, phrases like, "This feels so different, so perfect," and "It's as if someone understands our tastes better than we do ourselves," spilling from their lips in amazement. And each compliment, though attributed to the designer from the firm, struck Elena like a tiny victory, because she knew the reality behind it. Every painstaking choice, every nuanced detail was her own creation, her own vision, and the audience could feel the mounting suspense, knowing that Elena's careful, methodical planning and execution over years of unnoticed effort was culminating in a moment that would force recognition, not only from her family but also from everyone watching the story unfold. And in the midst of all this, Elena's husband, Arjun, was beginning to piece together the extent of her abilities, his pride growing as he realized that the quiet, diligent woman he had married was not only capable of managing the household flawlessly but also of creating masterpieces that commanded admiration from elite clients and now, surprisingly, his own family. And as the family paused in the grand hall, observing a particularly stunning arrangement of lighting and furniture, Elena felt a surge of emotion, the perfect balance of joy, anticipation, and triumph, because she knew that soon they would realize that the very person they had overlooked for years, dismissed for her domestic duties, was the genius behind all this. And in those quiet, tense moments, Elena allowed herself to imagine the shock and amazement that would wash over them when the truth was revealed, while continuing to guide her team subtly, adjusting a cushion here, moving a vase there, fine-tuning every element so that the reveal would be flawless. And she also made careful mental notes of their reactions, the pause in Kamla Devi's voice, the softened expression on Neha's face, the subtle nods of approval, all of which she catalogued internally, building the anticipation for the eventual confrontation with the truth. And beyond the emotional satisfaction, Elena also understood the strategic importance of maintaining secrecy until the perfect moment, because the impact of her revelation would only be complete when her family connected the dots themselves, realizing that the same daughter-in-law who had been cooking, cleaning, and enduring dismissive remarks daily was, in fact, the mastermind transforming their home into a work of art. And for the audience, these details created an intoxicating mixture of suspense, slow-burn tension, and emotional payoff, as they could sense that Elena's patience, strategy, and skill had brought her to the edge of the ultimate moment of vindication. And as the tour continued, each room elicited more and more awe from her family, comments spilling in bursts of admiration, and Elena's heart swelled quietly, savoring the irony, the silent triumph, and the culmination of years of meticulous preparation, while the audience, fully engaged, could anticipate the emotional explosion that would follow when her identity was finally revealed. And even as the family began to speculate about who could have created such perfection, Elena remained the picture of professionalism, her calm exterior masking the storm of satisfaction and anticipation raging inside her, carefully orchestrating every move to maximize the dramatic effect. And through this tense, suspenseful narrative, viewers were left on edge, completely engrossed in the slow-burn drama of the underestimated daughter-in-law whose hidden brilliance was finally becoming undeniable. The day Elena had been silently preparing for over 2 years had finally arrived, the day when all the patience, the late-night sketches, the unnoticed hours of research, the careful coordination of her secret projects, and the relentless determination she had cultivated would culminate in a moment that would forever change the way her family saw her. And as she walked into the family's showpiece home, her heart raced with a mix of anticipation, exhilaration, and a deep, quiet satisfaction, knowing that her mother-in-law, Kamla Devi, and sister-in-law, Neha, were completely unaware that the designer they had hired, whom they assumed to be an external professional, was, in fact, the very daughter-in-law they had underestimated, dismissed, and taken for granted for years. And Elena's team had already prepared the final installations, ensuring every furniture placement, lighting angle, color palette, and decorative element perfectly aligned with her vision, transforming the home into a space that was not only luxurious, but also a true reflection of thoughtful, intelligent, and artistic design. And as she guided her family through the grand entrance, introducing herself under the guise of the professional firm representative, Elena watched their reactions closely, seeing subtle expressions of admiration, curiosity, and disbelief beginning to flicker across their faces, while she maintained a calm and composed demeanor, hiding the flood of emotions she felt inside. And as they entered the living room, the centerpiece of the renovation, every detail from the perfectly arranged furniture to the strategically placed lighting and art pieces left them momentarily speechless, and Elena's mother-in-law began to exclaim, "I've never seen anything like this that's flawless," while Neha walked slowly, inspecting every corner, running her fingers over textures, tilting her head as she tried to understand the thought behind each choice, saying aloud, "Who could possibly do something this precise? The coordination, it's incredible." And Elena felt a thrill, knowing that their awe was completely unaware of who she truly was. And as they moved room by room, Elena presented each space with subtle commentary, as any professional would, explaining design choices, emphasizing functional efficiency, and highlighting aesthetic details, all the while carefully building the suspense for the moment of revelation. And when they arrived at the master suite, the moment Elena had imagined countless times in her mind, she paused, looked them both directly in the eyes, and allowed a small, knowing smile to appear, a signal that something significant was about to be disclosed. And then, with perfect timing, she introduced herself fully, saying, "I am Elena, the designer behind all of this." And the room went silent, the words hanging in the air like a shockwave, their expressions instantly transforming from admiration to disbelief to astonishment, as Kamla Devi's jaw dropped, eyes wide, finally realizing that the daughter-in-law they had dismissed as someone who just cooked meals and managed chores was in fact the mastermind who had designed every single aspect of their home's stunning renovation. And Neha's eyes widened, a mixture of shock, awe, and incredulity spreading across her face as she exclaimed, You did all this." And Elena nodded, maintaining calm yet exuding a quiet pride, while inside, she felt an overwhelming sense of vindication and accomplishment. Years of silent work and careful planning finally coming to fruition. And for the audience, the suspense exploded into emotional payoff, because every underestimated, overlooked, and belittled effort Elena had invested was now visible, undeniable, and impossible to ignore. And as she walked through each room with her family, explaining subtle design decisions, sharing insights into how she achieved balance, color harmony, and functional elegance, her mother-in-law, who had always prided herself on knowing best, now struggled to find words, her respect and astonishment finally overtaking her habitual critical tone. And Neha, who had once dismissed Elena's hobby as insignificant, now observed every detail with genuine admiration, asking questions about material selection, lighting design, and spatial planning, completely unaware that the very person they had scorned was the creative genius behind it all. And Elena's husband, Arjun, stood quietly by, watching the moment unfold with a mixture of pride, amazement, and relief, understanding fully for the first time the depth of Elena's talent, the intelligence and creativity she had been cultivating in secret, and the incredible patience she had exercised to orchestrate this perfect reveal. And as the family slowly absorbed the reality of her achievement, Elena allowed herself a quiet, victorious smile, savoring the irony, the justice, and the emotional weight of the moment, knowing that the same people who had dismissed her daily had now witnessed the undeniable proof of her skill, dedication, and brilliance. And the suspense for viewers reached a new peak, as they could feel Elena's journey of perseverance, hidden effort, and methodical planning culminating in a scene that was both emotionally satisfying and dramatically intense, the perfect blend of slow-burn narrative and climactic revelation. And even as Kamla Devi and Neha began to ask detailed questions, compliment every choice, and express astonishment at the transformation, Elena maintained her professionalism, guiding them through the completed home with calm confidence, while internally she reflected on the years of silent struggle, the careful balance of household duties and professional ambition, and the meticulous secrecy that had allowed her to reach this pinnacle. And for the audience, the story delivered an overwhelming sense of triumph, justice, and satisfaction, showing that perseverance, patience, and hidden genius can eventually de me recognitio. Following the unforgettable reveal of her secret project, Elena stood quietly, observing her family's astonishment and slowly dawning admiration, knowing that the years of unnoticed effort, unacknowledged talents, and silent perseverance had finally culminated in this moment, a moment that would forever alter the way they perceived her. For Kamla Devi, her mother-in-law, who had spent years dismissing Elena's abilities, now struggled to reconcile the image of the obedient, homemaker daughter-in-law she thought she knew with the extraordinary designer who had orchestrated the stunning transformation of their grand home, and Neha, her sister-in-law, who had constantly belittled Elena and mocked her hobbies, now moved through the rooms with an awestruck gaze, pointing out details and asking incredulous questions about fabrics, color coordination, and furniture placement, each query revealing a mix of shock, respect, and a reluctant acknowledgement of Elena's skill, and Elena, maintaining her composed, professional exterior, allowed subtle moments of satisfaction to show in her expressions, Her quiet pride mirrored in the controlled way she answered each question, explaining her design rationale with clarity and precision, knowing full well that her years of secrecy, meticulous planning, and silent dedication had earned her this recognition without any confrontation or argument. And the audience could feel the tension building as the family gradually realized the depth and scope of her achievements, the slow realization in their eyes creating a powerful emotional resonance that reinforced the theme of underestimated brilliance finally being acknowledged. And even Arjun, her husband, who had quietly observed from the sidelines, now felt an overwhelming sense of pride and admiration, understanding fully for the first time the amount of talent, discipline, and strategic planning Elena had invested, the audience sensing a layered emotional payoff as the silent architect finally stepped into her deserved spotlight, and Kamla Devi, initially struggling to contain her astonishment, began to speak, her voice a mixture of disbelief, curiosity, and an emerging respect. Elena, we never knew you were capable of such brilliance. This is beyond anything I imagined. And Neha, still slightly speechless, added, all these years we underestimated you. I can't believe this. The words echoing with the weight of past dismissals, a stark contrast to the constant criticism and belittling she had endured, and Elena smiled faintly, a smile that carried layers of triumph, restraint, and a quiet sense of poetic justice, knowing that while the acknowledgement was now being voiced, the true impact was in the realization that she had accomplished all of this without seeking approval, confrontation, or validation from those who had doubted her, and the suspense for viewers heightened as the narrative revealed the tension between past underestimation and present acknowledgement, highlighting the satisfaction of vindication earned through perseverance rather than confrontation. And as Elena moved through the home, pointing out subtle design details, the audience could feel the layered emotional dynamics, the awe, the reluctant respect, and the internal reconciliation her family was experiencing, recognizing that the woman who had been quiet, invisible, and constantly serving them was in fact the mastermind, the visionary who had orchestrated every aspect of the project. And each careful explanation Elena gave, each refined design choice she highlighted, reinforced the story's theme of intelligence, talent, and dedication remaining unacknowledged until the perfect moment. And while the family began to piece together the extent of her skill, Elena also allowed herself small gestures that reflected a subtle reclaiming of her position and credit, guiding them to appreciate not only the aesthetics, but also the thought process, problem-solving, and innovative thinking behind every design choice, turning admiration into understanding, respect, and eventually, reluctant awe. And as the minutes turned into hours, Elena's presence and calm authority shifted the energy in the room, from shock to appreciation, from disbelief to acknowledgement, creating a sense of slow-burn satisfaction both for the characters and for the audience, who could fully appreciate the narrative arc of struggle, patience, secret growth, and ultimate triumph. And as the family absorbed the reality of Elena's achievements, a profound sense of emotional vindication settled over her, a quiet power that came from having proven herself in the most elegant and effective way possible, forcing recognition without drama, confrontation, or resentment. And viewers could feel the catharsis of the long journey culminating in this moment, the realization that Elena's intelligence, creativity, and perseverance had transformed not only her career but also the family's perception of her, and that the subtle, calculated approach to revealing her true value had created a moment that would linger in their minds, reshaping relationships and establishing her authority and recognition in a way that was both satisfying and empowering. And as the tour ended, Elena's mother-in-law and sister-in-law exchanged glances, a combination of surprise, respect, and reluctant admiration in their expressions, while Elena maintained her calm, professional demeanor, knowing that the seeds of understanding and acknowledgement had been planted, that her silent efforts had finally earned the credit she deserved, and the audience, fully engaged, could anticipate the next stage of the narrative, where Elena's growing recognition, influence, and subtle reclaiming of respect would continue to unfold, blending suspense, emotional payoff, and empowerment in a story. Dete balance drama, slow intention, end ultimate vindication. After the dramatic revelation of Elena's genius and the quiet acknowledgement she had finally earned from her mother-in-law, Kamla Devi, and sister-in-law, Neha, the dynamics within the household began to shift subtly but unmistakably, as the very people who had once dismissed her, belittled her, and ignored her contributions now found themselves looking to her for guidance, insight, and approval on matters they had always thought were theirs to command. And while Elena continued to maintain her calm, composed demeanor, quietly navigating the household with the elegance and precision she had always exhibited, she began to notice the first real changes. Neha, who had once sneered at her efforts and belittled her hobby, now sought Elena's advice on arranging the guest rooms for a large family gathering, tentatively suggesting furniture layouts while waiting for Elena's input, while Kamla Devi, initially still processing her astonishment, began asking subtle questions about space, optimization, lighting placement, and decor choices, demonstrating a growing respect and a silent recognition of Elena's judgment. And Elena, fully aware of the shifting balance of power, responded with gentle guidance, offering professional suggestions that both improved the functionality and aesthetics of the rooms, all while letting her family feel as if they were part of the decision-making process. A strategic move that reinforced her influence without creating conflict or overtly asserting authority. And for the audience, this slow transformation of household hierarchy created a compelling tension, because every small interaction carried layers of meaning: past neglect, present acknowledgement, and future respect. And Elena's calculated patience, her silent mastery of domestic and professional realms, was finally influencing the very people who had underestimated her for years, altering their behavior and subtly shifting the family's internal hierarchy. And as days turned into weeks, Elena's presence became increasingly central to household operations and decisions, with her family turning to her for suggestions they had previously ignored or mocked. And each request for input was a reminder of her quiet power, her ability to guide without confrontation, and her mastery of both emotional intelligence and professional expertise. And this evolving dynamic was evident not only in everyday decisions like hosting events, organizing family schedules, or managing the home's decor, but also in deeper matters, such as handling finances, negotiating with suppliers, and coordinating large social functions, where Elena's insights consistently proved invaluable, earning her family's trust and, slowly, their admiration. And while Kamla Devi and Neha had begun to acknowledge her talent, the process was gradual, nuanced, and rich with tension, as the mother-in-law occasionally wrestled with feelings of pride, envy, and realization that the daughter-in-law she had once underestimated was now a force whose guidance was indispensable. And Neha's initial incredulity transformed into tentative respect, curiosity, and a desire to learn from Elena, highlighting the subtle power shift occurring within the household, all while Elena maintained her signature calm, never gloating, never pressing her advantage overtly, allowing the recognition to grow organically, which made the transformation even more satisfying both emotionally and narratively. And as Elena guided her family through the planning of a major family event, demonstrating her skill in coordinating catering, decor, and entertainment seamlessly, the audience could sense the rising tension and dramatic satisfaction in the slow acknowledgement of her capabilities. For each decision she influenced, each room she transformed, each plan she subtly led, contributed to the growing realization that the daughter-in-law they had mocked, underestimated, and ignored was, in fact, the linchpin of the household's success. And Elena's quiet approach, combining professionalism, patience, strategic foresight, and empathy, created a powerful narrative of empowerment, slow-burn suspense, and emotional payoff, as the family gradually surrendered to her expertise, fully experiencing the transformation she had orchestrated not only in the home's aesthetic, but also in the family's perception of her. And the audience, fully immersed in this carefully plotted arc, could appreciate the layers of suspense, emotional vindication, and tension as Elena's influence solidified, reshaping relationships and recalibrating the household power structure without a single overt confrontation. And as weeks went by, Elena also began to subtly guide her husband, Arjun, in his professional decisions, sharing insights from her own meticulous planning and client management experiences, enhancing his business acumen while maintaining a supportive role, demonstrating her quiet versatility and intelligence. And through this multidimensional influence, within the home, with her family, and indirectly in her husband's professional life. Elena had transformed from the overlooked daughter-in-law into a central figure whose judgment, taste, and skill were now both respected and sought after, creating a rich narrative tension and slow-burn suspense for viewers who could fully grasp the satisfaction of a meticulously executed arc of hidden brilliance finally manifesting in tangible, respected influence. With the recognition and subtle influence she had earned within her own household firmly established, Elena turned her attention outward, expanding her professional empire beyond her family, knowing that the silent perseverance, creativity, and strategic patience that had brought her this far could now be leveraged on a grander scale. And as she took on increasingly prestigious clients, high-profile renovations, and complex design projects, her reputation began to grow exponentially, fueled by glowing testimonials, word-of-mouth referrals, and the impeccable quality of her work. And though she had always maintained a discreet presence, allowing her creations to speak louder than her words, the demand for her expertise now required her to manage multiple projects simultaneously, coordinate a growing team of designers and assistants, and oversee logistics for large-scale installations, while still balancing her domestic responsibilities with meticulous care. And each successful project added to her portfolio, further solidifying her status as a rising star in the interior design world, demonstrating not only her artistic vision but also her ability to manage, inspire, and execute at the highest level. And while her husband, Arjun, continued to support her, the professional triumphs also brought a new dynamic into their relationship, as he increasingly recognized her strategic genius, her leadership capabilities, and her unwavering discipline, which had allowed her to create a flourishing enterprise from the ground up. And beyond her personal and professional growth, Elena's family could no longer ignore the impact of her achievements, as invitations to social events, media recognition, and the increasing visibility of her firm began to reflect back into the household. And even Kamla Devi and Neha, who had slowly come to accept her authority and insight within the home, now had to reconcile with the fact that the daughter-in-law they had once dismissed and ridiculed was a highly respected professional admired in wider circles. And this realization brought with it a mixture of pride, awe, and lingering guilt, a subtle emotional complexity that Elena noted with quiet satisfaction, because her long-term strategy of silent, persistent growth had not only established her as an indispensable figure within her own household, but also as an independent force respected and sought after in her professional sphere. And as Elena navigated these expanding opportunities, her team flourished under her mentorship, learning from her meticulous methods, her attention to detail, her creative ingenuity, and her capacity to balance multiple high-pressure projects while maintaining uncompromising quality. And she encouraged them to innovate, experiment, and refine their own skills, creating an environment that mirrored the dedication and discipline that had propelled her own journey. And for the audience, this arc highlighted the full spectrum of Elena's triumph. The transition from unnoticed daughter-in-law to professional authority, the gradual recognition and subtle vindication within her family, and the expansion of her influence into wider social and business circles, demonstrating the long-term payoff of intelligence, patience, and quiet resilience. And as her firm took on international clients, complex renovations, and cutting-edge design challenges, Elena's personal brand became synonymous with innovation, excellence, and discretion, a reputation that allowed her to maintain control over her projects while also being celebrated for her creativity, strategic vision, and leadership. And as the narrative continued, viewers could appreciate not only the suspenseful journey of slow-burn vindication but also the inspiring trajectory of a woman who, despite years of underestimation, discrimination, and lack of acknowledgement, had created a legacy defined by skill, determination, and uncompromising excellence. And while her family began to recognize and respect her achievements in both domestic and professional spheres, Elena's emotional satisfaction remained deeply personal, a quiet yet profound sense of triumph derived from knowing that every overlooked moment, every dismissed talent, and every unacknowledged hour had contributed to this sweeping success. And through her growing empire, she also inspired other women around her, clients, team members, and viewers alike, showing that resilience, patience, and quiet mastery could overcome underestimation and lead to extraordinary achievement. And while the external accolades, expanding clientele, and professional respect were significant, the internal fulfillment, the satisfaction of strategic patience, and deliberate mastery remained Elena's most cherished reward, creating a narrative that balanced suspense, dramatic payoff, and empowerment. The culmination of Elena's long, silent journey of perseverance, creativity, and unrecognized brilliance had arrived, and as she stepped into her family's grand home one last time for the culmination of the wedding preparations, she felt a mixture of satisfaction, triumph, and a quiet emotional resonance, knowing that every late night, every unnoticed effort, every dismissed idea, and every quiet act of skill and patience had led her to this moment of ultimate vindication, and the air was charged with anticipation, because for the first time, her mother-in-law, Kamla Devi, her sister-in-law, Neha, and even her husband, Arjun, were fully aware of the magnitude of her talent, the scope of her influence, and the depth of her intelligence, and this recognition was no longer tentative, subtle, or indirect. It was tangible, overwhelming, and impossible to ignore, as Elena's designs, meticulously executed with her team over months, transformed the home into a breathtaking spectacle. Each room a masterpiece of style, functionality, and personal ingenuity, demonstrating not just her aesthetic sensibilities, but also her leadership, strategic thinking, and unwavering dedication. And as the family walked through the spaces, moving from the grand entrance to the opulent living room, the dining hall perfectly arranged for the gala, and finally to the master suite that had been her personal canvas, the reactions were priceless. Kamla Devi's eyes welled with admiration and a hint of humility as she whispered, "Elena, I never realized we underestimated you for far too long." And Neha, usually quick with sarcasm and dismissal, now turned to her with wide-eyed awe, saying, This is incredible. Every detail, every touch, each is yours. You did all of this." And Elena, maintaining her calm, professional demeanor, allowed a small, victorious smile to show, knowing that her years of patience, secret effort, and quiet mastery had finally forced acknowledgement in the most spectacular way, while Arjun's pride radiated openly as he observed his wife's brilliance being celebrated not just by clients, but by the very family who had ignored her for years. And as Elena guided them through each space, explaining her choices for lighting, color, furniture, and flow, highlighting how each element contributed to the harmony and elegance of the home, the family's admiration deepened, their earlier disbelief replaced by a mixture of wonder, respect, and finally, an emotional acknowledgement of her worth. And in these moments, Elena realized that the ultimate victory was not merely professional recognition or social acclaim, but the reclamation of her own dignity and the silent assertion of her power, skill, and intelligence over those who had underestimated her, and the audience could feel the slow burn tension finally erupt into full emotional payoff, witnessing the transformation from invisibility to undeniable influence, from dismissal to respect, and from quiet perseverance to celebrated triumph. And as the evening continued, Elena's presence was not only commanding but inspiring, as she subtly guided the final arrangements for the wedding, coordinated her team flawlessly, and ensured that every detail reflected perfection. And as guests began to arrive, their collective admiration, praise, and astonishment echoed through the home, amplifying the satisfaction of Elena's journey, while her family watched in awe, slowly realizing that the daughter-in-law they had overlooked, mocked, and ignored had orchestrated an achievement beyond their comprehension. And even moments of humor and humility emerged naturally, as Kamla Devi finally admitted aloud, "We thought she was just cooking and cleaning, but she has outdone every expectation," eliciting smiles, nods, and a wave of quiet triumph from Elena, who had long anticipated the moment when words like these would finally be uttered, validating the years of silent effort she had invested, and the suspense for the audience, carefully built over 9 prior parts, reached its ultimate crescendo, because every glance, every reaction, every acknowledgement of Elena's skill and authority was a cathartic release, a long-awaited vindication that tied together the slow-burn narrative into a shander, satisfying ending. And as the final guests moved through the rooms, complimenting the arrangements, marveling at the sophisticated lighting, the harmonious color schemes, and the masterful furniture placement, Elena allowed herself to reflect on the journey, from the undervalued daughter-in-law cooking unnoticed meals, to the secret professional building a thriving design empire, to the woman whose talent was finally recognized and celebrated, both professionally and personally. And in this reflection lay the true emotional weight of the story. Triumph achieved through intelligence, patience, and perseverance. Vindication served not through confrontation but through consistent excellence, and a personal and familial acknowledgement that could not be dismissed, ignored, or belittled. And as the evening drew to a close, with the family finally embracing Elena's genius and contribution openly, and Arjun proudly standing beside her, fully aware of the depth of her abilities, Elena experienced a rare, full-circle moment of satisfaction, knowing that the arc of struggle, silent growth, secret victories, and ultimate recognition had reached its zenith, a moment of closure that was both professional and deeply personal, emotionally resonant and narratively powerful. And for the audience, this final part delivered the ultimate payoff. Slow burn suspense culminating in dramatic revelation, strategic vindication, emotional satisfaction, and a celebration of hidden brilliance finally recognized. And as Elena's family fully acknowledged her skill, intelligence, and worth, the story closed with a sense of completeness, empowerment, and triumph, leaving viewers inspired, emotionally moved, and deeply satisfied by the journey's conclusion.